Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to the final episode of the Legends podcast with me, Sarah Faruya. The theme is skin in the game for season 8, and today I am closing with a literal miracle, a miraculous human being who is not only miraculous in his presence, but also in the work that he's offered to the world over the past 8 years. You will understand why once we start speaking that this wonderful man, Cara Moon, Matthew Dons, um, when we start speaking about what's happened to him and what's his life has become, we will see why I mean he's a miracle. Welcome, Matthew. Hi.
Great to be here, Sarah. I'm not sure I'm going to live up to that intro, but I shall try.
Well, you most certainly will, Matthew, because it's I mean, I use the word miracle, of course, for in a spicy way, but I also do just think keep every day I think, wow, I just, 8 years ago when you first announced what happened to you, nobody would have imagined that we'd be having this podcast today. And even, we've had to put it off a few times as well. So it just feels like such a genuine privilege to have you on here today. Genuine, really genuinely happy that you were able um to come. I really am.
Well, it's
Really
good to
am.
speak to you, Sarah.
Okay, so about Matthew. Matthew Dons is a marketing consultant and business coach from the UK. He's been living in Tokyo since 2007. Matthew came to Japan to study traditional Japanese martial arts. His other hobbies include baking, studying the history of technology, and watching 80s films. In July 2016, Matthew was suddenly diagnosed with terminal cancer, also known as stage 4 cancer. The cancer has spread a lot, so his life expectancy with treatment was just 7 to 9 months. Although crowdfunding and cutting edge immunotherapy have helped him live almost 8 years so far, he's still in a life and death fight every day. Although Matthew is very cynical, he was genuinely shocked to discover there's no serious effort in any country to stop people dying of cancer. This is despite the fact that cancer kills around 10 million people every year, and it destroys the lives of many more people. It's a brutal disease with equally brutal treatments. Experiencing this firsthand motivated him to set up the non-profit Make Cancer History, and I would like to hear about that later in our conversation. Make Cancer History connects patients, oncologists, and researchers to share cancer knowledge and save lives. On a personal note, I first met Matthew about 12 or 13 years ago when he came to speak for the Women's Professional Networking Group, FEW, for Empowering Women, that I was the president of at the time. And he came and first of all, he did a cybersecurity conversation where he was very frank. And at that time, he had an enormous bushy beard and some wild hair. And he spoke very frankly with our women about cybersecurity and really helped a lot of women in that room. And then he went on to do a marketing conversation with us. Again, it was a special event, and I clearly remember at that event. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an indication of the two arms of Matthew's life, the technology and then the business consulting, marketing, entrepreneur side, which we just talked about before we jumped on the line. But the thing that really sticks in my mind about Matthew, because I always like to touch on the science, the psychology, and then the kind of spirit, is that he, I clearly remember this. We were in the Omotesando station, and I was about to say goodbye to you. And I always ask, do you mind if I give you a hug? And you said, of course. Who wouldn't want a hug? And I was so surprised because so many people are like, no, thank you. And that touched me so much because I loved it because it gave me a good cognitive dissonance because I saw this guy who I thought would be like, no hugs for me. And you were so warm and open. And I think that speaks to the work that you've done over the last 8 years with your YouTube channel, which I highly recommend anybody go and watch, not only for the stuff about cancer, but about advocating for yourself in treatments. It's really, really helped. I honestly, Matthew, in genuine terms, it helped me to advocate for myself last year when I needed surgery as well.
Okay.
And just the way that I showed up with my doctors and so on, it was genuinely helpful. And so I really I love this really strong combination you have of the science, the psychology, and the spirit, like that kind of spirited vim and verve, you know. I don't mean like the woo-woo new age spirit. I mean like the spirit that lives inside a person. And I really love these contradictions because we want people to be one thing or another, right? I do too, even though I'm like the many ways to lead a life person. So I really love this kind of combination of like pure science, curiosity, and just loving spirit that you have inside you. Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, just on the subject of hugging, I think it's a really interesting topic, and it's something that, like, physical touch is something I've been so aware of over the past 8 years, particularly with the nurses, that, you know, when you're suffering pain just after surgery, and, you know, maybe a nurse puts you know, her hand on your shoulder, and I say her because in Japan almost all nurses are female. And of course, you know, we humans communicated physically for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years before we had speech, right? So we communicated by touch. And, you know, I remember when before my son could talk, there was this one point where he learned to pull me. So there was suddenly this communication where he could grab my wrist and pull me to some toy he wanted or a room he wanted to be in. And it was like this massive breakthrough as a parent. It's like, wow, you know, there's this sudden change that he can grab my hand and pull me. You know, he's suddenly got this way of communication. So yeah, I'm really interested in that. And yeah, it's been interesting the experiences in Japan in the healthcare system, where it's still very normal for nurses to touch you and give you a hug or hold your hand or whatever. Whereas maybe in other countries, there's now issues around that. Like, is there a chaperone present in the room? Is there a litigation issue? All this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sure you're very aware of the sort of thing that goes on in the US and the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been very, very interesting. Yeah, but yeah, it's been quite an amazing 8 years in good ways and bad. And the time before those 8 years has been kind of squished and compressed and muddled up,
Condensed.
which is really interesting as well.
Yeah.
Because the cancer diagnosis was completely out of the blue. There was a trip back to the UK, spend a few months with my parents in sunny Norwich, and I got like a chest infection on the plane. And usually I wouldn't have bothered doing anything, but it's like, well, I've got 3 months in the UK. It's easy to see a English speaking doctor. I'll just go and get some pills from the GP. Went to the local GP. It's one of those systems where a bunch of what we call a practice in the UK. So a bunch of doctors working together. You tend to see a random doctor. And she gave me the pills. I got some bad side effects, came back like a week later saying, oh, I'm feeling really terrible after those pills. She was a bit suspicious, sent me for a chest x-ray and blood tests and stuff. Blood test showed anemia, and I was then referred for a gastroscopy and an endoscopy. So, you know, classic kind of camera in both ends type thing. Endoscopy found a massive tumor, 35 millimeter tumor in my sigmoid colon, which is like the S-shaped bit that goes down the left-hand side. And they said, you know, we'll send off the samples. Worst case scenario, you know, it will be cancer, and we'll whip it out, and you might have a few months of chemo after that, and you'll be fine. Turned out to be very different, because samples came back, said it's cancer. I was 36 at the time, so, you know, it's the last thing they were expecting. I and the endoscopist was expecting that they would find some things called polyps, which are like little growths in your intestine. And they can if they're not too big, they when you do an endoscopy, they're generally able to remove them then and there, and that's it. So I was expecting that, and maybe the antibiotics for the chest infection had like caused some irritation, and that was causing all the abdominal pain and upset stomach. But no, big tumor almost blocking the intestine. CT scan showed the cancer had spread a lot, which basically, if cancer spread to a distant place, that's terminal.
Yeah.
And then the PET scan, which is that's the radioactive sugar scan, where they like inject you with a special radioactive sugar. You wait for like an hour for it to move around your body. Then they put you in a special scanning machine that picks up the positrons emitted from the radioactive sugar. That showed the tumor in the abdominal lining. But I mean, I didn't know anything about anatomy. I knew we had
No.
intestines. I didn't know about the different parts and what they did. And I didn't know there was like this thing called the peritoneum, which is the abdominal lining. And when the cancer's in there, the prognosis is very poor, because it's a membrane that goes over your lower abdomen. It helps the organs slide past each other when you're walking around. It protects the organs. So that means it's like a blood barrier,
Yeah.
which unfortunately for cancer means it's difficult to get the chemo drug in. Also, the tumors on the peritoneum tend to be the shotgun effect. We've got lots and lots and lots of little tumors. So they don't show up on scans very well. They're very flat, and scans need things with a little bit of depth to see because of how scans work. That's just the nature of physics, unfortunately. So you might get like this kind of rippling effect on the membrane, and they say, well, okay, maybe there's cancer in there. Maybe it's just inflammation. But the PET scan, yeah, did confirm there was like a biggish glowing tumor. So, I mean, the doctors don't talk about prognosis really for cancer much anymore until you're really the last few weeks. So go onto Google, look up all the stats for the UK and Europe, and yeah, 7 to 9 months prognosis with treatment. So that's like you had surgery and chemo. And what was scary was there were no outliers. So like there were not many, usually when you hear about these stats, they say, well, you're young, and you've got to remember the data includes people who were like too sick to have treatment, or who had lots of other health conditions. But with this data, it's like, it's like a cliff kind of graph. It's like there's not lots of wonderful survival cases. The only thing was, I mean, now I know that data was based on it's always previous 5 years, right? So what's called 5-year survival data. So now we can recalculate it using the 2016 to 2021 data, and we see life expectancy, like people who got my level of cancer in 2016, their average life expectancy was around 15 months, which is still really quite short, and again with very, very few outliers. And even now, I haven't looked at the stats recently, but I mean, they're creeping up, but it's still, in 8 years, not much has changed, unfortunately. Yeah.
I mean, that must have been such a shock for you, and also being in England. What was that like?
So one interesting thing was it was a quick decision to go back to Japan. So that was a good thing, I guess you can say, because I'm with my family, visiting my parents in their little terrace house. And of course, although it was my home, I wasn't born there, but it was where I grew up. Most of the people I knew had like spread around the UK and the world. So it wasn't like I had loads of support there. And I asked the surgeon who was like consulting, oh, what do you think about going back to Japan for treatment? And he said, well, their outcomes are better than ours. So if you have the chance, it kind of makes sense to do it. But there were a couple of really well, there were three major factors in my survival, I think, early survival. So one thing, well, two things were my sister. So she started crowdfunding kind of almost immediately. Now, I knew quite a lot about crowdfunding, but I didn't know people did it for medical stuff, because if you remember back in the day, crowdfunding was like, you love singing and you want to do a CD, or you're doing an
Yeah.
indie movie,
Yeah.
right? So we had, or there were the horror stories of, Kickstarter, where someone would like design a beer cooler with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all this kind of stuff, and the project would like turn into this kind of monster, and then be all these tens of thousands of backers pledging the money, saying, "Where's my flying beer cooler?" And then there was Indiegogo, that was more like artists, doing your print run of your book, or your CD or that kind of thing. But my sister's like, "Oh, you should start crowdfunding," and so she got that all set up, and that was interesting and uncomfortable, because before then I had not used my real name online.
Right.
Right, my
That's
name
right.
online
That's
was
right. It was
my
only
name was
Cara Moon,
Cara
right?
Moon.
Yeah.
When I gave talks, I was generally talking to the computer tech world, and particularly security, and it's everyone uses nicknames, or the culture of that was your login name on a shared computer system, right? You're on a shared computer system, you chose a username, and yeah, in the corporate world it would be like first name, last initial, or whatever, but tech world, it was nickname.
Yeah.
So that was very odd, like suddenly my name and photo was online. But the second big thing in my survival was my sister as well, because she was working for a company called Goldman Sachs, which is a big financial company. I don't really know what they do, but they're one of the big financial companies. And her healthcare package included the family. Now, it didn't include the family for treatment, right? It included the family for, I think they called it health advocacy or something like that. So her medical treatment's covered, like it's a big corporation, so private healthcare. And she had had some health trouble, so she happened to know how it worked. And she talked to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, we do health advocacy for family as well." So they had this little tiny company that they owned called Critical Health Solutions, and it was essentially, it was like telephone support. So if a member of your family had a serious health issue, like an acute dangerous thing, or maybe a chronic thing, that they were dealing with, they could call this number, and you spoke to there was a practice nurse and there was a doctor, and they could look stuff up for you and come back to you,
Right.
so that they could say like, "Oh, we can't give you health advice, however we can find the top doctors for your type of multiple sclerosis," or and we can go on LinkedIn, look at their resumes, we can look at their success rates, we can do all this stuff. So to have two medical people to talk to who weren't treating me, weren't involved in my treatment, who were 100% impartial, and like the doctor, Dr. Matthews, he was a GP, but he was like towards the end of his career, so he was very, very experienced, and he had been doing this job as well for many years, of which every single case is critical, hence the name Critical Health Solutions. So his normal thing was dealing with people who have suddenly been told they have HIV, or a wasting lung disease, or
Yeah. Something
parasite in the brain.
serious.
Yeah,
So he had a
so
real integrity and a lot of
absolutely.
experience as well. So he had integrity, experience. He didn't have any kind of, he's not treating you,
He's
so he
not
doesn't have
treating me,
to be
so
risk averse
yeah.
or anything
So
like that.
so
Yeah.
that was just amazing. And so in the space of these few weeks, when I'm getting ready to go back to Japan or whatever, I'm calling them up basically every day. And because I didn't
Yeah.
know how to read a blood test report, I
No.
didn't understand about the different scans and stuff. There's a very opaque medical language. obviously lots of like Latin, like if you read a CT, like a radiography report,
Yeah.
they talk about things being distal and
Yeah.
proximal, and what does any of this mean?
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah,
that was just
quite.
amazing, just to be
Yeah.
able to talk to them. So those were two massive factors.
Massive factors. Now, you just mentioned something there about early prognosis or early survival rates. So I'm assuming then that there's different stages to survival. You're in a different phase of your survival now than you were then. And one thing I'm really hearing here, which I think is very important and actually overlaps with coaching quite a lot, so overlaps with what I do in the world, is that ability to advocate for yourself. And also, so number one, the ability to advocate for yourself, which I would dump into the psychology bin of
Yeah,
my, the psychology bin of my bucket of my business. But
yeah,
then in terms of the science area or the consensus reality area, there's the actual access to that resource. So like
yeah.
I would put resources inside the science area. So you had access to this resource with your sister. Now, I would like to talk about this later, not right now.
Mm.
I'm assuming this is part of what's triggered your Make Cancer History model,
Yeah,
is this
absolutely.
kind of access to the, providing access to more people to that kind of resource where an advocate with integrity and impartiality can be helping or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But I want to go into that kind of psychology area, which is I'm calling up every single day. Now, Matthew, I know myself, I would be doing mental flips and calculations going, am I being too much? Am I asking for too much? And and I know a lot of my clients would be like that too. And there's so many layers to this that we don't need to get into: class, gender, um how your brain works, what all this guy, is it
Yeah,
life or death? But even so, people still won't advocate for themselves because they feel too um self-conscious or whatever.
yeah,
Where do
absolutely.
you, and this is part of, and I implore you, dear listeners, please go and watch Matthew's YouTube channel and donate to Make Cancer
It's
History as well,
horrific,
but
but
go and
don't
watch.
watch the earlier videos. It is horrific. When I
Oh
watched
no,
them,
but they're so good. I want to ask you about that as
some
well. But
dark
like,
stuff.
they're so, no, it's not. It's so good, Matthew. Like, you don't understand how input. Like, I have actual data that I can tell you that I was able to advocate for myself, having
Mm,
started to watch those videos from 2016 to now, because you made me brave. You made me brave, right? You made me get
mm.
over myself and my ego and my wish to be liked and my wish not to bother people and all that abject nonsense,
Yeah,
and lean into the service that I pay for, you know?
yeah,
So what is it in you, do you think? Because you could have died early on if you hadn't advocated for yourself in that way
yeah,
and leaned into your resources. So what do you think, either what's in you or what would you advise people?
yeah. So, I mean, one thing was just desperation. Like in a
Yeah,
way, it was
great.
like, well, it's obvious I'm going to die very soon. I might as well put everything into living a bit longer. The real tension was like wanting to live for my kids,
Yeah.
but which meant spending a lot of time reading a lot of stuff, making a lot of phone calls, going to medical appointments and stuff. When I came back to Japan, a few weeks later, come back to Japan, see a surgeon. He wanted to do surgery the next day. I said, like, no, give me a week. So he did an endoscopy just to, in Japan, they're very, very risk averse. So he's like, it's too dangerous.
Very
But then he did
thorough.
an endoscopy and said, as long as you eat a special diet for this week and whatever. So that kind of tension of like wanting to spend time with my kids and keep things normal for my kids. At the time, my son Edward was he would have been like 7, and my daughter Jessica was like 2.5 or something. Um, so that was the real tension, was like, I've got to put 100% into being with my kids and also 100% into staying alive, and that adds up to 200%, and there's only one of me. um
Yeah.
so yeah, so quickly, like things kind of fell away that would have been in the way. So things like embarrassment. I'm still very shy. I still get very nervous, but the kind of counter forces are now much bigger. So there's like that trite saying, feel the fear and do it anyway. But it is a bit like that like,
Yeah, it is.
and like you, I often fall back on reframing stuff. So when you're nervous about something, well, chemically we know that's the same as being excited. And in like high school biology, they teach you about the fight and flight syndrome. What they fail to teach you is that for modern humans, what we mainly get is freeze, right? Because you're in a high risk situation, and your body's dumping these chemicals into your blood to get you ready to fight or run off. But what really happens is you get overwhelmed and you froze. But
Welcome to my world.
it's everyone's world really. And
Yes, you're
I
right.
found that, like, you know, people think I'm a bit weird because I do love these trite sayings, but I think there is a lot of value in them. So
Don't worry about it.
Grinder, the co-founder of NLP, he said the opposite of fear is not bravery, it's curiosity. So like, think of a typical situation, like you're frightened of spiders, and then you get kind of curious about, how do spiders live? Why do they run around in that scary way? Why do they
Okay.
make webs that go in
So
my
how did you
face? And
apply that? How did you apply that to your situation then?
so I started to wonder, well, what are some things about people who do survive longer with cancer? What
Okay.
are some even really general things, like how do you make a decision when you've got not much info to go on? Some of the info is probably wrong. The info tends to be contradictory, and you're completely in a realm you have no experience of. Like, is there a good way to make a decision? Is there a good framework? And I remembered that 3-step thing of, like, when you're in a crisis, you, number one, don't worry alone. So like, tell a bunch of people who may be able to help you. Number two, really try and get the facts. Number three, make a plan, because the robust science shows even a crappy plan is like 1,000 times better than no plan at all.
Oh, interesting.
So I was thinking, like, okay, well, I'm going to tell a bunch of people who do I know who is like dependable, really close friend who had lost a parent to cancer, someone I had been at university with years before who I knew was something medical. Turned out he was a radiographer. So, I was calling him up and asking him all these questions. And then trying to get the facts. So not just relying on information from doctors, but look at what other patients were saying, like joined all the Facebook groups. Macmillan Cancer in the UK, which is a big cancer charity, they have very good patient guides. If you're in the UK, they'll send you printed ones, or you pick them up at the hospital. You can go on the website and download the PDFs. They've got a couple of hundred guides, many of which are like around 100 pages. And they've got guides like side effects you can expect with chemotherapy, or dealing with secondary breast cancer in women, or talking to children and teenagers about cancer, or dealing with money issues when you have cancer. So
Yeah, that's massive.
their guides are
Massive.
their guides are amazing. They're available in a bunch of languages as well. They're like in Mandarin and Urdu and whatever. They just look at like the popular languages in the UK and get them translated. And
Yeah.
then also, I said there were 3 factors that helped me survive in the early times. So 2 of them were my sister,
Oh.
and one of them was this conversation I had about a week after the terminal diagnosis with my friend Eben Upton. So Eben Upton OBE, I guess, very famous guy in the UK. who I'm very privileged enough to know him and his wife personally. So Eben is co-creator of a computer called the Raspberry Pi, which is a little one board mini computer for getting kids to be creative with technology. So about a week after the terminal diagnosis, he and his wife came to Norwich, took me out for lunch at a pub, sitting in the garden. He basically told me how to survive. This is unbelievable. And he told me that the way to survive is to like ride the wave of the new treatments, so that you get the earliest access to the treatment that gets you a little bit further, so that you can then be around when the next treatment comes on. And he told me that so this was 2016, that there were still some people alive from the original wave of HIV. So you and I remember a little bit, you know, if you remember when HIV was like, it was first kind of talked about in hushed tones, and, you know, kind of really a taboo. And sadly, a lot of people died because it wasn't talked about, particularly like around San Francisco. And later on, we had this thing called good AIDS and bad AIDS. So like good AIDS is like when a child has AIDS because of a blood transfusion, and then Princess Diana goes and visits them in hospital. Bad AIDS is like, you know, someone sharing needles or being homosexual or whatever. But anyway, so
well, hey,
this like,
Matthew, the modern version of that would be good cancer and bad cancer.
yeah,
Bad
absolutely.
cancer, you're fat and you haven't lived well, right? And good cancer would be like they were so healthy, or they smoked, or they drank, or whatever it is, right? That's the modern version. There's always some
vegan yoga instructor. How has she got cancer? So
how did that happen?
Yeah, exactly. So he was saying that there were still some people alive, and what had happened was they had got into the early trials, and they were in the subgroup who made it a few more years, and then they had kept fighting to get into more trials, and they had like ridden this wave of medical progress. So that was a real epiphany. It was like, wow, someone's actually given me a non-bullshit, like real idea of how you could live. Well, I could try and access the newest treatments. And then I started thinking, well, but also I need to be in physical condition to be able to continue. So I have to be a bit careful. Like, are they treatments that are going to be destroying my body, right? Is it going to help me live but trash my body? And then I wouldn't be able to get onto the next step. So from that, I kind of identified this, my patented 4-step or 4-aspect plan of how you survive with cancer, which is, number one, choose the treatments and how you have them based on the impact on your immune system. Because I was reading a lot of these medical papers, and when they had like a bunch of people having chemotherapy and a couple of them getting a really surprisingly good result, they'd put some comment like, we're not sure about this result, maybe it's an immune response. It's like, oh, that's interesting. That's not something you want to ignore, right? So usually in data, you're meant to cut off the outliers, right? You say, oh, well, we'll look at the average, cut off the outliers. I'm like, oh, well, actually, I'm desperate enough to fight to be one of those outliers. So yeah, looking at immune stuff. Number two, get access to the treatments as early as possible. Now, this is the opposite of how cancer treatment works. So normally in cancer treatment, they give you the tried and trusted ones first, and you have these like first line therapy, second line therapy, third line therapy, and as you go through so I'm on a chemo at the moment, which is like a third line therapy, which means the side effects are bad and it doesn't work very well. But then there are all the kind of new experimental treatments and whatever that are in theory come after that, but of course in reality you've passed away sadly, or you're too sick physically, like you get rejected from the
take
trial,
on the fourth line,
or you've had too much pre-treatment or whatever. So yeah, getting access.
What's pre-treatment?
So when you go for a clinical trial, they need to be careful about what treatments you've previously had, because
Mm-hmm.
often the trials are combo trials where they're testing like an immunotherapy plus a chemotherapy. And if you've already had that same chemotherapy by itself, that may skew the data. So they say, sorry, even though we think this immunotherapy drug is amazing, because we're doing the trial with chemo, can't give it to you. So you get rejected for, so trials have like an inclusion criteria and an exclusion
Right.
criteria. And also you may be
Yeah.
too sick. And also you may just be too tired to look for trials.
Yeah,
So
that,
my
of
idea
course,
was,
that's a massive factor. That's
yeah.
my area, the too
So
tired bit. I'm
so I
so
just
curious
thought
about
you've got to get access to the newest treatments early on.
that.
And
Yeah,
then the third thing was, and again, this is like the opposite. So with cancer treatment, you have a treatment and then you have another one and then you have another one. And I thought, well, with cancer, cancer becomes resistant to treatment. So the way economically, the way it works is they give you a treatment, and after a time, you know, most of the cancer's dead, but a little bit in many cases remains, and that is for some reason resistant to that treatment because the cell wall is a bit thicker or it is slightly genetically different or whatever. So it seemed kind of obvious to me we want to have multiple treatments at the same time. And of course, doctors hate this because, you know, you might be going to multiple hospitals and you've got side effects and they're trying to manage the side
yeah,
effects, and their tendency will be to blame the other treatment for your side effects. And of course, every time they give you a drug, they have to look at all these other drugs you're taking and make sure there's no conflicts or whatever. So they really hate that, but that seems to be a really big factor. And then the final thing, which is the really unpleasant thing, is having as much treatment as possible. So I was in the Facebook groups, many of the patients would be American, and I'd see that they'd get to like a certain level of treatment response, and then the treatment would stop, I guess because of insurance reasons. They say, oh, you're doing really
yeah,
well, you know, let's stop it. And I found, like, talking to doctors and patients in Japan, having treatment for like just as much as your body could take seems to be a really big factor. That, like, you know, if you get the all clear, then continue the treatment for like 12 months afterwards. In the UK, unbelievably, they don't even continue the testing. So I'm so shocked because, of course, my parents will call me up occasionally and say, like, oh, do you remember so and so? Sadly, she, you know, got cancer, and I would say, like, oh, well, what's the recent blood test say or whatever? And my parents would say, oh, well, actually, on, you know, on the NHS, they don't do regular blood tests like after you've had your treatment. I'm like, well, in Japan, I mean, in Japan maybe they over test, but you know, you get monthly blood tests for years after cancer.
yeah.
You get
They're serious about
scans.
health here, right? It's a
They
massive
they are
cultural
very
difference.
serious about it.
And I think you covered that in one of the Q&As that you did on the YouTube. I think it was Q&A 1 or 2. So if anybody wants to go and listen to those, Matthew talks in a bit more detail about that on there, about cultural
cultural
differences
differences. Yeah,
between in quite great detail, the cultural differences between US, UK, and Japan. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's really useful to be in these international
yeah,
Facebook groups, because you
absolutely.
can advocate for yourself even better. So I actually want to ask you now a bit about, like, pre this and young Matthew, up until you came to Japan, or up until prior to that. Like, where did you get, I've written down the words dogged determination, curiosity, devotion. Like, where did you get this? Where do you think, like, you were raised in Norwich? Your sister obviously also has this kind of instant, like, right, this is what we're doing.
Yeah,
Where do you think
yeah.
this came from in you? What was your childhood and upbringing like? Where does it
Um,
emerge from?
so for me, the big things in my childhood were probably reading, like really
Okay.
loving reading. and it's still something I kind of care a lot about, I guess, is reading and getting people reading, people of all ages. And you know, reading doesn't need to be sat there with a paper book. It could be listening to an audio book. It could, you know, God, yeah. I mean, if I had to say a fourth factor in my survival, audiobooks, podcasts, and stuff. Wow, to be able to listen to, you know, I listen to a podcast now, like it's an American podcast, the Nursing Oncology podcast, and it's for nurses, and it's nurses and doctors teaching each other how to deal with patient side effects, how to, you know, what are the new treatments coming. It's like I can listen to
What a
this.
time to be alive.
It's
What a time to
incredible.
be alive. Yeah.
And audiobooks, you know, I mean, I always associate surgery with James Bond, because I would, having abdominal surgery, you've got to walk after it. Like, it's really important to walk, and you're walking up and down a ward. You might be in the hospital for a couple of weeks. So I've had like my guts ripped out, and I'm listening to these audiobooks like of the Ian Fleming, and the Ian Fleming James Bond books. There's no connection to the films at all, right? They're really, really well written, really interesting. So it'd be like forcing myself to walk. So as a child, reading, and this, do you remember those Usborne books? Do you remember those? Were like, Usborne was this publisher specializing in kids books. They do these very colorful, they had like science books and history books and
Yes.
language books.
Yes, I do.
Very, very colorful. And of course, the ones from like the 70s and 80s, you read them and like the first 20 pages were in color and the rest was all black and white to save printing money. It's like, what? So
Amazing.
that kind of love of reading. So I really love reading like science and maths books and tech books and that kind of thing. But then the books that absolutely changed my life were Nancy Drew. Reading the Nancy Drew books. So I remember.
So you're like a detective now. You're a detective of
Yeah,
your
so
own cancer
how it
now.
happened was
Amazing.
like a book mail order company came to my school, and you know, you could order like 3 books for 4 quid or something, and they deliver the, you know, it was like they deliver. Do you remember there were all these odd ways you could buy stuff, like the home shopping catalogs where someone would come and collect the money once a week or something. All these bizarre
Yes.
payment terms. Our friend Tracy tells me about layaway in Australia, where you'd buy
Yep.
something in the store and they'd have it on a shelf for you. And I
Yeah.
remember like
Until you paid it. Yeah.
yeah, and like for TV or video, you'd get it on like buy to rent. And of course, when you finally owned it, it was completely obsolete. So there was this book company, and there was this book, Murder on Ice. And oh, that's, you know, that sounded kind of cool. So I was absolutely hooked. And then to find that there was this massive sea of Nancy Drew books, because there were, so these were the 90s ones, and I think at the time there were like 20 of those. But then there were, because Nancy Drew is like written by a publishing company, it's not an author, right? And there was a boys version as well called the Hardy Boys, which wasn't very good.
Oh, that's right. The Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mysteries.
And
Yeah.
there were a few tie-up books as well, because it was the same
Yeah.
publisher. So
Yeah.
nominally they had authors, but they had a pool of authors or whatever. I didn't know this as a child. I'm like, one day I'm going to go to America and meet Caroline Kenny, the author of Nancy Drew. It's like, no, it's a bunch of people in a committee room. But that really got, I mean, I was proper hooked on reading. I was like, you know, in the morning, eating my breakfast cereal, book in hand, like shoveling my Weetabix or Shreddies in my mouth. I just read and read and read. And then the other big thing was traveling. So, you know, I was like a lower middle class family. My parents were both teachers, and they had just, one of the reasons they decided to be teachers was to get the long school holidays to spend with the kids.
Yeah.
So that meant, so in the UK, you get 6 weeks summer holiday. There's like half-term holidays, which may be a week or 2 weeks. So they would try and get us abroad once a year, which, you know, usually meant like camping in France in the rain and whatever.
Same.
Um, but yeah, just the love of like going to different countries. And then there was a time when there was a time before cheap flights where you could get cheap package. I don't know if you remember the early package deals
I do.
where there'd be companies with very bizarre names, and what they would do is they would charter an aeroplane, right?
Yeah. Charter
So
flights.
like the company would basically they'd own those bits of cloth that go on the back of the seat, because this was before screens. So you'd go on the aeroplane, and I remember the first time I went to Turkey, we'd gone on a plane, and you know, they'd like chartered some planes. So they literally, the company owned some bits of cloth with the words Air Tours 2000. So they're on the back of all the seats. And we fly, and you know, you'd arrive at 3 o'clock in the morning in some strange airport, because this was before cheap flights. So this was the only way that poor people could fly.
Regular people. Yeah.
Yeah. And you'd
Yeah.
you know, so you'd arrive at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I remember arriving 3 o'clock in the morning in Turkey. The feeling of the hot wind. This was just the most exotic thing to like. It's nighttime, it's hot, and it's windy. This is meant. I can't
Bonkers. Like it's so
understand this.
big.
And
Yeah.
then
It's like, yeah.
you're on
So,
like
so
a
different to England.
yeah, exactly. And then you're on like a 2 hour bus, and then you arrive at some half-built studio apartments in like a construction site. Um, so I remember like Turkey was the place that felt like magic. So, and we just, I mean, it was just like a seaside resort or whatever. We went to Marmaris on the coast of Turkey, but we did like, you know, you could do like a 1 day trip to Ephesus. So we went to the ancient city of Ephesus, and because I was like a kid, I'm like climbing all over. I mean, no one cared at that time, but like I'm climbing
No.
over these, and Ephesus is like, you know, Greek and then later Roman, and like climbing over all this Greek and Roman stuff. So you know, when they had the underfloor heating, I remember like
Yeah.
hypercourse. I climbed into that. Um, I left very quickly when I saw what I assumed were hornets. Um, so that was so those two things, like reading and travel, that made me have a very odd relationship with school, because I was reading stuff that was far, far beyond anything we were doing at school.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, when we were studying the Romans at school, or like a few years later, we did a dirt cheap trip to Egypt. I was so lucky. I went to Egypt just before it became dangerous. So, so it's
Hmm.
like that year, a few months after our trip, was that big terrorist attack. If you remember, it's called
Yeah.
the Luxor massacre. There was a
Yeah.
coachload of German pilgrims or something, and that was like the turning point of Egypt, right? I was there a few months before. But so I'm, you know, you're in the history lesson, you're looking at this Egyptian stuff, it's like, well, I've actually been there, and some of the stuff in the book is wrong, or it doesn't capture what it's like. Or, you know, you're in a science lesson, and I'm like, well, I've read books by real scientists, and it's not what you're saying in this book, or it's not what the
Oh, I'll
non-special.
bet you were popular, Matthew. I
Well, I
can I
was,
can relate to this so hard. My dad was a chemistry teacher.
yeah.
Okay, let me just tell you this, Matthew. For one of my birthday parties, my dad brought chemicals home, and he did chemical like a magic
Yeah,
show, you know,
yeah.
where you turn the water black and stuff like. Can you imagine? Other people were getting magicians and stuff, and I was there
Wonderful.
with my dad with all the bloody chemical equipment. Oh,
Yeah, so I did not get
oh
on
my
well with
God.
school. So I
Oh
didn't get on
dear.
well with school, but I mean, I was very well behaved, and my parents are both teachers, so I couldn't like.
Yeah.
So you know,
Yeah, yeah.
I would say I'm quite anti-schooling now, in the extreme.
Do you homeschool your kids?
I homeschool my son, so my daughter goes to the local shabby elementary school.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I homeschool my son, and I have done. So he
Okay.
have done since kindergarten. So he went to Japanese kindergarten, which was fine. It was a nice one. Um, it was like a kindergarten for people who don't like kindergarten, which was good. And then since
Okay.
then we're homeschooled, and now I'd still do sort of homeschool him, but he's also doing online Japanese high school. Um,
Brilliant.
so
He's
yeah,
a young man now, isn't he?
yeah, he is huge.
Almost
Actually, he's taller than me. So he's 15, and my daughter is
15 now, right?
my daughter is 10. Um,
10. Wow, 15 and
yeah.
10. Yeah.
So yeah, from my
Oh,
childhood, those were the two big things: the reading and the travel. And I have got both my kids into reading to some extent, not so much my son Edward, because unfortunately he's discovered Minecraft. But one of the really horrific things about the cancer is not traveling much.
right.
And of course we had COVID as well. So
Yeah, COVID. Oh my God. And all this is happening in the middle. That must have been terrifying for you.
yeah, well, it wasn't. So there were things like, so one thing was I had surgery during COVID and you couldn't have any hospital visitors. So like a member of your family could come once a week to like leave things for you or pick up laundry or whatever. So that was really grim. Like being, I think I was there for like 18 days or whatever. Um, but I could call my family, but no visitors, no friends, or whatever. And of course, it's not good for your friends because they're always like, "Oh, I'll come and visit you, cheer up." And like, sorry, policy is no visitors. But the fear thing, that was not such a big deal because randomly my immunotherapist, his background is infectious disease control.
Ah,
So
okay. So he could,
because I
yeah,
was I was like saying, well, I've heard in the UK all these immune compromised people are told to like shelter in place, like it's a fucking nuclear war or something. And he's like, no, you're you're fine. He said
that's good.
he said it's, if you do get COVID, it's useful to know quickly, so just keep an eye on it. And he said, well, you do blood tests all the time anyway, and you do frequent CT scans. So with a CT scan, there are very unique kind of nodules you get when you have COVID in your lungs. So that's one
Right.
of the reasons why Japan actually did quite well out of COVID, I think, on reflection, is they've got loads of CT scanners here and they're really good at CT scans. Because Japanese people live so long, many elderly people here die of pneumonia. So they're very good at looking at lung scans. So when other countries were like doing these stupid COVID tests that had a 20% chance of missing the COVID, Japan was just doing CT scans and they're like, yeah.
So ironically, you were in a much better position during that time because you had access to better information than
Yeah,
most people,
absolutely. And
which is part of you. I mean, now it makes perfect sense to me that you're describing this background. I love the idea of like I get very, very quick visual images pop into my head. So I've got this image of you crawling around in the Yukadambo, the underfloor heating of the Roman place in Turkey, and then being in your history class going, I've been in there. It's not like
yeah, exactly.
it's just amazing. And then so how did that lead you into your kind of pre 2016? You came to Japan because you loved traditional Japanese martial arts. But also you had this kind of double pronged and still do have this kind of double pronged approach to things. Like you were, what were you doing? What was your trajectory prior to 2016? So you have the entrepreneurial sense and also you have this kind of technology thing. So and you also we touched on this briefly when we were chatting before we came on the call was you started you're one of the co-founders of something called Tokyo Hackerspace, but that hacker thing as well, it's all about getting as much newest information as you possibly can about what's going on in the world. I mean, this is really taking me on a journey back into a completely different life that I had back then. But can you just tell me what your route into all of that was and what your trajectory prior to 2016 was?
It's obvious, and I'm 44, it's been a long journey. Um,
Yeah,
and it is almost funny. It's like kind of when I had that cancer diagnosis, it was like, well, my whole life has been in training for this point. It's like,
interesting.
and I'm very concerned about that for other people, because although I said like I had no anatomical knowledge, when I got the diagnosis, I didn't really understand about different parts of the intestine, for example. I didn't know anything about cancer, but at least I had a decent science background. I studied mathematics at university, so I understand a bit of stats.
Yeah.
I can read well. I can Google stuff. So in a sense, I'm like in an incredibly privileged position. I just think of
Right.
like, if you get cancer and you're homeless, or if you get cancer and you're a full-time carer for your disabled grandmother or something, like what on earth do
Or a
I'm
single parent.
or
Yeah.
just really poor, you
Yeah, or
know,
just poor or
I
mentally ill,
yeah. It's I
blind.
think so a big thing of the NPO is to like help those people. So the trajectory
Wow.
begins with, so my parents were teachers, so there was always this is going to sound really weird to people who are not in the UK, but in the UK we had two types of school buildings. We had some that were Victorian and some were like trashy 1970s 80s things. And there's a big
That was
story
mine.
going on about that. This thing with the aerosol concrete or whatever it's called. Have you seen that in the
Okay.
UK? Like this reinforced concrete that's not concrete at all and not reinforced at all is now all collapsing. So we had schools with like flat roofs. And one of the consequences of this was people would break in through the roofs, steal all the computers, and sell them. I don't know how you would sell like a BBC microcomputer, but so in a rare kind of smart move, the government at the time, which I hate to say it was probably the Thatcher government, they said, well, at the weekends, let's get the teachers to take the computers home, because then they're not going to get stolen, but also the teachers will get familiar with computers, because most schools didn't have computer teachers, right? And computing was a big thing in Britain because
Yeah.
um,
Sinclair.
Sinclair, but particularly BBC Acorn. And
Yeah.
there was this project called the BBC Computer Literacy Project that was actually
Yep.
a response to Japan. And interestingly, the BBC Computer Literacy Project came from another project, which Sarah and I are far too young to know about, called On the Move. Now, you don't know what On the Move is, I guess, but On the Move was the BBC Literacy Project in the 70s, and it was a TV series with Bob Hoskins as a delivery, he was like a delivery driver who couldn't read, and a mate of his teaches him to read. But then also there's this thing called like the literacy project, so he's introduced to these TV programs, and of course it's a bit meta because he's in, and they also had like adult education classes. This was also a response to Japan, because what happened was in the, I guess, early 70s, people from the UK Department of Trade and Industry came over to Japan, looked at manufacturing here, and were just so shocked that in the 70s, like things are being made by robots. And, in the 50s, Japan just had this step-by-step plan of like, we're going to dominate textiles, we're going to dominate sewing machines, we're going to dominate print. So Britain had to catch up, and they found in the UK factory workers couldn't read the labels on bottles, for example, which is very dangerous. Couldn't, didn't have the literacy skills to read the manual for the machines. So there was this it was a very successful program. I mean, it taught the nation to read, right? It massively increased literacy in the UK. So it was like a home study course. You could go to evening classes, and there was the TV program. So then later on, ITV, which is the commercial TV channel, did this program called The Chips Are Down, about the microchip revolution and how the UK was going to be left behind. The BBC did their computer literacy program. Computers in schools. My parents, being teachers, had to take them home at weekends. So growing up, there was like computers at home. My parents are completely non-technical, so I'd be like playing around with them and stuff. So I was like writing little basic programs in the basic language and that kind of thing. So that was like the origin of all the tech stuff. At the same time, we had a couple of English as a second language schools in Norwich. So we had homestay students. I just happened that I got on very well with the Japanese homestay students. And particularly when I was like 12 or something, we had this student, Leiko Yamada, she's actually from Shikoku, but she like lived in Kyoto. So she was 18 years old. I was like 12 or something. And she taught me origami and she cooked me. She was very tenacious, so she cooked me Japanese food. Like you can't at that time you couldn't buy anything Japanese in Norwich. So she went to the local Chinese takeaway and asked if she could buy small amounts of ingredients for them. It's amazing. Yeah, so she was kind of awesome and really introduced me a lot to Japan. I did judo for a bit with some of my friends as well. So it's kind of interesting in Japan. We had other Japanese homestay students. They'd always bring gifts, and my parents are very good at keeping in touch with people, which I'm terrible at doing.
Yeah, my mum and dad were as well, especially my mom.
Yeah, I mean,
Really good.
Christmas,
And me
like
too.
Christmas.
I've got
Yeah,
tins and tins and tins of letters, and I'm still that way inclined.
yeah,
Really that way inclined. I love
that's a
social
really
media
good,
for that reason.
it's a
Yeah,
really good
I
trait.
really enjoy that. Yeah.
Yeah, like so we are still in touch with Reiko. And now how many years have passed? Like 26 years we've been in touch with her. And
So that set you on your trajectory to actually moving to Japan. And so
yeah,
I've got a sense of your kind of computer love, the maths, the computers, the history of the UK. Yeah, go on.
and Japan. And then I was at university in sunny Birmingham, place close to our hearts.
Me too. Where did you go? I went to
So I was at,
Aston.
yeah, so I was at University of Birmingham, which is,
Okay.
it's kind of in Birmingham, but yeah, there's town and gown issues, as we say in the UK. But yeah, in a place called Selly Oak, which is where I discovered
Oh
my
yeah.
love for curry, because of course Birmingham has the
Oh
best curry.
yeah.
Birmingham has the best
I
curry on
used to
earth.
live on that road.
Oh,
Yeah, I
like
used to
yeah,
live on the best curry road
yeah,
in Birmingham,
yeah,
Ladypool Road.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So again, for like people who are unfamiliar with like why do we have the best curry in the world? So we have this special curry called Balti, and Balti is in it. The word Balti means bucket, and is like the dish it's
Yeah,
served
it's
in.
like nabe, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's based on Indian wedding dishes, and they cook the curry, and then in the last stages of it being cooked, they add lots of extra herbs and spices and stuff. So that's why it's incredibly rich and decadent, and great student food. So I was at University of
Yeah.
Birmingham. Um, and that was when I got into Japanese films, because um, around that time, Takeshi Kitano won the Venice Film Festival award for his film Hanabi. So that was when his films became like really got big in Europe. I was a student. We had the world's best cinema in Birmingham. It was the oldest working cinema in the UK, called the Electric Cinema.
Yeah, I know it well.
And first as a student on a Sunday, you could, Sunday tickets were like £1.50, and often had double and triple bills, so you could sometimes watch 3 films for £1.50. So I really got into Japanese film, and then after a couple of years, I quit university, which is like probably the best thing I ever did. And yeah, that was kind of life changing. So I quit university. I had this wonderful year living in Birmingham as a student, but not being a student. So my student ID card still worked, so I could go in and use the computer rooms. I was living in a shared student house with a bunch of students. And at that time, Japan and the UK finally signed the working holiday agreement. So I was like emailing with all these people saying like, do you know someone I could stay with in Japan for a bit? And, I scraped together some money for a ticket. A friend of a friend organized me a homestay in Chiba in the city of Funabashi. And before I knew it, I packed up my stuff and I was there to spend a year in Japan. So that was end of 2001. I arrived in, I should actually dig out a passport and look. I think I arrived September the 10th, 2001. So the
Gosh.
first night of the homestay, homestay mother wakes me up, Mashji-san, big news, and like we go and see the Twin Towers, you know, getting hit.
That was the same year I arrived too. Yeah, that
Really?
was 3 months into, yeah, 3 months into my stay that happened. The week before my 30th birthday. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So if it might have been one day later, all the flights were grounded for like a month, so
yeah.
I wouldn't have made it. It wouldn't have happened. So that got me into Japan. So I was staying with this host family. I was just loving Japan so much. I remember actually crying arriving on the plane, like flying into Narita, and I was like listening to some J-pop on the headphones on the plane, and I just like, wow, this is I'm home. Like this is it. I hadn't even landed, and then
Wow.
I arrived in Narita, and you know that first time you arrive in Narita, and you realize Narita's not in Tokyo, and you've got this
Yeah,
long, you know, it's called Tokyo Narita. It's not in Tokyo.
not in Tokyo.
Um, and yes, I mean,
Don't take a taxi. Don't
yeah.
take a taxi. Don't,
So I
unless you're
still have
really
like
rich.
an hour-long train journey to meet this host family in Funabashi, and I had sent my stuff beforehand, and I think they were a bit shocked because I had like sent 13 massive boxes of stuff with like 500 books and camping stuff. Because you know, because I was essentially coming from university, even though I hadn't been a student for a year. So like, I had all my worldly possessions. They didn't like go back to my parents' house or whatever. So that got me into Japan. Like everyone, teaching Eikaiwa, so teaching English conversation at Nova, um, going to Tower Records in Tokyo, in Shibuya Tower Records store. This was in the day when Tower Records had lots of magazines, and there was this
Yep.
magazine called 2600. So, 2600, that's a bit interesting. And it was a hacking magazine. I didn't know that you could have a hacking magazine. So this really kind of got me into like the whole hacking computer security world. There was like this magazine of articles, and I couldn't understand any of it. But end of 2001 was like, it was like a perfect storm of technology, because you had MP3 had just become a thing. So it's like suddenly we can get a CD and turn it into MP3s and email the MP3s or whatever. Wi-Fi was just becoming a thing. And I don't know if you remember, we had like broadband just started at that time. If you remember, in Japan, there was this company, the broadband company of Yahoo, called Yahoo BB. They'd
Yes.
have these
Yes.
tables, so they'd have these tables outside all the train stations and these big bags. And it looked like you could just go and get a bag and there'd be something in, but you go and then they'd try and sign you up for a broadband contract. So this was like when, you know, so we had high-speed internet, we had MP3, so it could have equivalent of like podcasting and stuff, and we had Wi-Fi all at the same time. So it's like a really good time to be learning a lot about tech. So then that was how it was, and I was there for about a year and a half. I went back to the UK. So like, you know, working holiday visa was only for a year. When it ran out, I buggered off to Korea for 3 days, came back, had an hour and a half interrogation in Narita airport, because they're like, you've been here for a year and now you're saying you need to come back and go to lots of Japanese festivals that you failed to go to in the year. We think you're going to work, blah, blah. Anyway, I got in, and then yeah, had another few months. So I was like here for a year and a half or something. Back in the UK, working as an IT instructor, missed Japan too much. And then came back after a couple of years, and that was 16 something years ago, and I've been here ever since.
And
So
just prior to this, what were you doing then? So when you came and spoke for us at the women's organization, what were you doing? Because you did, it was
so
the two arms of your business there. It was the
yeah,
entrepreneurial
there
side,
was
which was
some, there
about
was quite
marketing.
between the two times I came to Few. So
Yeah.
the first time I came, I was doing a bit of tech consulting and running a little at-home English school.
Okay.
And then because of some of the tech consulting I was doing for a language learning website, I got into SEO, which is like how you get people to find your website on Google. And also this,
search engine optimization,
yeah.
SEO. Yeah.
And that was kind of interesting. But then there was this other thing called CRO, conversion rate optimization. Because it's not enough just to get people to a website, you actually have to get them to do something. And that's all about behavioral psychology and like what words do you put, like, you know, if you put click here to download guide, that performs worse than a button saying get your free guide, because the word your is powerful, or even get my free guide. So I suddenly became interested in all of how that works, like the language aspects and the design aspects, and the fact that you could test this stuff, and the fact that human psychology has not really changed since humans, you know, first evolved.
Since humans.
You know, that
Love that. Yeah, got it.
right. So you know, it's really interesting. A lot of people are under the wrong impression that our attention span is short, and but human attention span has always been something like 15 seconds, right? So if you film someone doing something and they're unaware, after about 15 seconds they start looking around. What's changed is we're in a far more distraction filled environment. It's not that we have less attention. And if you think about it, like the computer is the worst possible environment to get stuff done, right? So that, you know, you're on a looking at a website and you've got other tabs open, there's these alerts popping up. It's the worst environment. We've made ourselves distraction filled environments. Walk along the street and
God,
there's
Matthew, this can
and
you do a whole thing on this, right? Can you do a whole
yes,
video on this? Because we don't have time for this today. In one of your Q&As, right, you said that you think that social media is terrible. You have to be on there because of your work that you do in the world.
yeah.
But you said it was terrible, and you think that the
In the
social
future,
media sites
yeah.
will be revealed to be as damaging as smoking
Yeah, so
was
so
revealed
I
to
think,
be.
yeah, and other smarter than me people have said this as well, that like in the future we're going to look back on the big tech companies now and view them like we viewed the tobacco companies. So when the tobacco companies first knew about the links between smoking and cancer, and they suppressed the research, they did marketing to kind of counteract it. You know, there's that fantastic film, The Whistleblower, with, is it Russell Crowe,
Yeah,
based on a
Russell Crowe.
true
Yeah.
story of this guy who was interviewed in 60 minutes and he had to be like in shadow or whatever. He was a tobacco executive who kind of revealed that all this stuff was happening. So yeah, I think that because it's very interesting. I completely grew up with technology, and particularly computers, you know, and being digital native far before that term was around. But I remember as a kid, like playing video games, and after 30 minutes, you'd then go and read a book, and then your parents would say it's time to go outside, and you go and happily play outside for 5 hours or whatever. And you know, those games were, we'd often describe them as being addictive, which meant you'd play them for like 20 minutes. It's like this game is so addictive, you could play it for like 25 minutes. But nowadays games are like designed to, you know, drop a dopamine hit at spaced intervals. And of course social media is as well, that, you know, social
Yeah.
media is optimized for what they call engagement, which means, you know, things being clicked on or liked or commented on. And
Yeah, I mean, this is a whole other show, as Jerry Springer would say. And I'm fascinated by this. I almost want to kind of invite you back just to talk about that. But
we
please
should
do a
do,
whole video on that if you can.
yeah, we
It's
should.
just amazing.
And it kind of, it ties into this other thing I do, like giving talks, right? So,
Yes.
and particularly when I found out that when you give a public talks, or like talks are generally optimized for like the lowest common denominator. And you can give a talk that's like crowd pleasing, but that's not necessarily a good thing. So when I did that second talk for Few, we got 100 and something people in the audience. And at the end, you know, doing my sleazy marketing thing, it's like, I have a very special offer for you today, ladies. And it was like, you know, I will package together my next small business seminar, plus some books, plus some guides I'd written and some checklists and stuff. And, you know, 8 people kind of came up at the end and said they wanted to do it. And my talk was only for those 8 people, really. I mean, I think people enjoyed my talk. I hope everyone got value. But everything in my talk was true, and some of it was not particularly nice, I guess. You know, saying like, if you're a small business owner, you have to stop thinking about yourself, start thinking about what your customers actually want. How can you provide it to them, you know, at a price that works for them and gives you enough profit? And, you know, you should study all this stuff, and you should do all this stuff, and you should get serious about this stuff. That's not very nice if you're kind of, well, my business is half hobby and I don't want to take it to, you know, it's kind of challenging, right? So I found that with talking, with public speaking, and I guess this ties into my YouTube videos as well, that like, you know, you could say my videos are informative, but I think mainly they're brutal, especially the earlier one. So I should say, like, in my early videos, I've got like this acid burns over my face, which is a side effect of one of the molecular targeted therapies. So I look like an acid burns victim. I'm crying a lot in my videos, of course, because they mainly talk about yeah, getting close to death. And they're very, very brutal. But, you know, as you said right at the beginning, a lot of people don't talk about this stuff. The word cancer was a taboo word in the medical world until the 1980s, not just in society, in the medical world. People working in hospitals would use euphemisms to talk about cancer. It's incredible.
It is incredible.
It was like this taboo thing, and still now we are very uneasy about it. So, for example, we know about 10% of people who get lung cancer have never smoked. We also know over the last few years that percentage is increasing. Well, that is very uncomfortable, because people like to think someone with lung cancer, it's self-inflicted. We know generally you can't have cancer from one thing. So it seems to be you need at least 2 risk factors. So even a cancer, I'm very concerned with cervical cancer caused by the HPV virus. There are many
Human
people who get
papilloma virus, right?
yeah, there are many people who get that virus and don't get the cancer. There are many heavy smokers who never develop lung cancer. There are many people who have a so-called high risk lifestyle. Unfortunately, in the medical literature, that includes your work environment. So sometimes in the media, they'll describe something as being like lifestyle related, but you've got to remember that includes people working with toxic chemicals in a t-shirt factory in China. You know, so it's multiple factors. So there's this uneasy thing about blame and what is healthy and what is nutritious, and, you know, what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating. And, you know, we have, and it ties into social media, there's a lot of the kind of like the shame culture. It's a fantastic book by John Ronson called You Have Been Publicly Shamed, all about like
great.
the social media.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to jump in on this, Matthew, because I feel really, really strongly about this. I still want to kind of ask you what the genesis of you being so open about these YouTube videos is. I think it takes that's me too. I'm really not very I really like to get into the depth of things as quickly as possible. Not everybody's able to do that. I also run a grief circle,
Mm,
right? So I listen to the worst like I hear things that you will have heard yourself because you're also very open to this kind of stuff, but I hear of deaths and so on that are really, really
yeah.
awful. And then I hear of people who, so the people who come to the grief circle have lost people and are dealing
Mm,
with that heavy loss. You know, like, oh yeah, my sister's died. She had lung cancer. Did she smoke? Straight away, like this
mm,
kind of thing. But also what you were just talking about, this blame and shame culture. A friend of mine, and Tracy's, died a few years ago from
yeah.
breast cancer. And the last videos that she posted, she was also a very generous, very open-hearted, very unself-conscious person in that way. She was like, I don't know why my prognosis is so bad. She's crying into the camera,
Mm,
saying, like, I'm doing everything right. I'm eating clean. I'm doing this. And I'm thinking she could have had, like, whether she lived or not, which she probably wouldn't have, she could have enjoyed that last six
yeah.
months without
Yeah.
all that blame and shame that she was, maybe she had the wrong kind of seed, or, you
Mm,
know, I don't know. I feel really, really strongly about this, and I don't know where to land, but I love the work that you do because it's so thorough, and it questions the scientific prevailing, it questions the prevailing wisdom, but like you say, on the wave of it, on the crest of the wave of it, not by completely doing a 360 and going into some mad conspiracy stuff, which then kind of blames and shames people.
yeah.
If that makes sense, it breaks my heart to think that people have that, in addition to the shit sandwich, there's just more and more and more shit in the sandwich because of this kind of stuff. And I
Yeah.
want to know more about this, what you're offering. I think this is a nice time to kind of pivot into talking about what is it that made you do those early videos. And I would say to people, do go and watch them. I don't think they are brutal. I think they are beautiful and honest and straightforward. And it's one of the many ways to lead a life. I think it's terribly kind of ableist to imagine that we shouldn't be able to look into your eyes and listen to you crying with like burns on your face, that that's somehow something we should avoid or look away from. That's not something um I want to encourage my listeners to do. And I appreciate you giving the warning though.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sensitive content warning. I really do appreciate that. And it's you as well, Matthew. It's you. If you're uncomfortable with that, that's your business, not mine. But um
So,
you know,
so
what is it that
why did I?
made you do that? And also, where are you going now? So I really, really, really want to ensure that we give a good 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But
Yeah.
let's say we've I've had you for 90 minutes already.
Just
So, and I don't, you
fast.
know, listeners will listen because this is such fascinating content, but like you, like, I want to honor your time as well, but like, come on, tell me, what is it that has made you so generous, so brave, that you've been able to overcome your ego and your shyness and be on YouTube crying with a shocking looking skin and sharing this taboo stuff with the world and then turning that into a non-profit?
Yeah.
Take me through that.
So I started the videos because really to get people to go to the fundraising page, to go to the crowdfunding page,
Ah, okay, good. Yeah.
right? So it's like, and it was desperation, and it was very, very, very difficult. But then there was also this idea of, even though I need to check the dates, but like, the first video, I guess, was like a few weeks or even couple of months after first surgery. So there was also this kind of thing of, even at this point, I've already studied a lot and learned a lot that I wanted to share, just because of people who weren't in the position that I was in. So people who maybe struggled with reading, or especially technical. I mean, most people struggle with technical reading. So
Yeah.
people who wouldn't be able to, like, or people who wouldn't know. So I know a lot about finding things on Google. So I know that You know, if you find a medical paper on Google, the first few pages of results, it's typically going to be an abstract, and you can't get hold of the full paper. But I know Google hacking kind of techniques to find those, and you know, I was using BitTorrent to download video courses for medical practitioners and all this kind of stuff. So there was that kind of just, I mean, just the classic thing of, here's what I wish I had known, I'm telling you now, right? Just the classic kind of thing. You know, like the small business owner who's like, well, I wish I had had this product, so I had to make it myself, and now I'm sharing it with you. But then also I found it kind of not just therapeutic, but practically useful, that like I'm talking through this stuff, making sense of it, particularly noticing things that I didn't really understand well. So that's a big, you know, if you have to explain something to someone, it very quickly highlights the vague areas, you know. So
Yes.
sometimes it's like,
I'm
oh,
I'm feeling the teaching lineage coming in here as well
yeah,
a
of
little.
course. And but you know, you and I both do coaching, right? And at its purest essence, I think you know, the coaching and also consulting, it's like you talk to the person like, where are you now? Where do you want to be? How do we make a bridge to get you there? If you're nasty like me, why aren't you there already? I'm sure you don't do. But you know, so there was that aspect as well of like, you know, you're in this horrific situation. You've just got a cancer diagnosis, or a family member that's got cancer diagnosis. You're somewhere you absolutely do not want to be. Where do you want to be? What do you need to know to get there? What physical condition do you need to be in? What finances do you need to be able to get on that plane to get the treatment in the other country? Or what questions do you need to ask the doctor to make sure you're getting the right information? So yeah, so there was that. And then to a small extent, I guess there was also kind of legacy thing that I wanted to be able to, my kids to watch the videos in the future. I don't know if they'd want to
Oh.
watch them. So very occasionally I do non-cancer rated videos. So I did like one on growing up with computers. I did one on my love of music, because I like, two of my really close friends had really good taste in music and had a really good music teacher and kind of thing. Then it moved on to, as I started living longer, people, particularly in the Facebook groups, were noticing this. It's like, oh, this person, you know, in a really bad
He's
situation,
walking the talk.
he's still here. Now, of course, this is
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues with that. Okay, there's a lot of issues with that. This thing called survivor bias, which is,
Oh.
you know, we see
Oh.
the people in the Facebook group who say, well, I cured my cancer by
Yeah,
saying
no.
no to chemo and doing my coffee enemas every day and drinking my green smoothies, and I'm still here after 7 years. And it's like, well, yeah, but unfortunately there are a whole bunch of people that did that as well and are not alive to post in Facebook anymore. So
Yeah.
survivor bias is a really huge issue in cancer, as is availability bias. Availability bias means things you remember, you tend to believe. So it's probably the biggest failing of humans is that we believe stuff that is easy to understand, easy to remember, not necessarily true. So people are now messaging me. This is like, I guess, 6 years or something ago, asking me about the treatments. You know, oh, you know, you've done immunotherapy, but you're not a patient who would usually be eligible for immunotherapy. Why is that? And I say, well, actually, in Japan, we have this different type of immunotherapy called adoptive cell transfer immunotherapy, where they take cells from your body, grow them in a lab, train them in a lab, get billions of them, put them back in your body to try and fight the cancer. Japan is like a pioneering country in this. So people are interested in that, and I start like helping people come over to Japan for treatment. So then I've got my own Facebook group, just so that I'm not kind of answering all the same questions again and again. You know, I've got a few text files of stuff I can copy and paste, like this is how the treatment works in Japan, this is how long you'd have to be here. And then I started, kind of organically learning loads of stuff, just because even though I kept saying I cannot give medical advice, people would be sending me these long medical histories and saying I've had this, and this treatment, and I would Google them and learn some bits about that. And in Japan, I've got this thing about women. To a large extent, medical care is about nursing, and I very much feel I'm alive because of the nurses that are taking care of me. They're the ones that are with you after surgery. And at the immunotherapy clinic I go to, the head nurse is also like the manager of the clinic, and she's just, she's been like a second mother to me, Nurse Yamada. She getting a little bit
We'll
emotional.
dedicate this episode to her. We'll dedicate this episode to her.
She would
Nurse
like,
Amada.
I mean, she's still like, she'll call loads of, relentlessly call clinics and hospitals looking for certain treatment I need or whatever. So, and then I became very concerned about cervical cancer from HPV virus, and also breast cancer is a problem in Japan because the screening is not very good here. So there's I think still in 2024 there's no national breast screening program. So I mean, there's breast screening everywhere, but it's all like local government run and organized. It's not
Yeah,
very good.
I get it in my a yearly checkup.
Yeah,
But I also have a friend who died of breast cancer in 2015 who was
yeah.
a Scottish lady. Yeah.
And a lot of Japanese women particularly don't want a mammogram because Japanese women tend to have quite dense breast tissue, which means a mammogram is like particularly painful.
Very painful. Yeah.
There's but there's also a shortage of female oncologists here. Because there's a shortage of female doctors here. One of the reasons that you and I know is because they fucking rigged the exam entrance exams at the medical universities, where they would downgrade applications from females because they thought, well, they'll
That's a real conspiracy, people. That's an actual conspiracy, a real one.
Yeah. And these are big kind of medical universities. And there's other issues why there's a lack of female doctors here as well. So yeah, I became particularly interested in cancers in females and how I could help with that. And I was always just kind of flabbergasted that there's no serious effort to deal with cancer. Now I should kind of explain that a bit, that, of course there are people all over the world researching cancer. There are people researching at universities. There are a few non-profits, not a lot actually, doing research. There are pharmaceutical companies researching. There are, of course, cancer doctors everywhere. But if you look at it, it's not a serious effort. It's not what a normal person would do. Like, a normal person would say, oh, we've got people with cancer. Why do they die? How can we prevent that happening? We've got people who get cancer. How could we find that out earlier? How could we prevent it in some cases? What are the countries that are doing well? How can we copy from them? Within those countries, what are the centers of excellence or whatever? What training do we need to give to clinical practitioners so that they can work together better? There's no kind of like really serious effort. And in a tech world, we've seen, I mean, the thing with self-driving cars have arrived suddenly because people made a very serious effort. It's like a few years ago, they're saying, oh, well, we'll have self-driving cars, but they'll never be able to park. Parallel parking is far too difficult for a self-driving car. Now, of course, a self-driving car parallel parks considerably better than a human because it can cheat. It can have cameras all around it, and it can see out the back of its head, which we can't do, and this kind of thing. So I thought, well, what would a serious effort look like? How could I do that? What are other people doing? Why is it working or not working? So I just started thinking about this. So there was like just the practicality of people were asking me stuff and I was replying to lots of questions. There was the idea of I'd made all these videos, but I need something that is maybe more, not exactly more rigorous, but more structured. So I thought, well, you know, if you don't know what to do, you make a course. So I made a course of videos, like the cancer course. It's got 7 modules, I think. And you know, the first module is all about getting help. I think the next module is about chemotherapy, the next module about surgery, the next module about side effects, next module about crowdfunding. It's just all the practical stuff. And the way I did those videos was I did them as Zoom sessions. So I got a bunch of cancer patients and carers. I talked about the topic and that bit was recorded, and then I stopped the recording and took their questions so I could then feed that into doing further videos and supporting materials. Because I didn't want to share.
Genius
I didn't,
idea.
well, I didn't want to share their questions and stuff, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course.
So
So clever.
well, it's so easy. I don't know why I thought of it, but yeah, it now seems very obvious. Like, you know,
Yeah.
because I
Like,
always
well,
find it,
yeah, of course.
you know, because the struggle I always have with video is like talking into a camera. And I know you're meant to like talk through the camera to one person, but do it in a Zoom call with 10 cancer patients, easy. Yeah. So, you know, it's like when they film a TV comedy in front of a live studio audience. It's like that.
Ah,
Um,
yes.
you know.
That's
Um,
so clever. Yeah.
so I did that, and then so basically I started doing it as if it was a non-profit, and then there's all the bureaucracy here, and then eventually, just in July, we finally got everything approved, and we're now an official non-profit. A bunch of people are helping me, so I've got a little team, tiny team. There's like 5 of us, and I'm a very cynical and negative person, as you know. So I'm always like looking at.
I don't find that at all, Matthew. I want to just jump in there. I feel like what you are is a performative cynic, but actually you're an incredibly kind-hearted and optimistic person. But you perform cynicism for the outcomes that you want your people to get.
Yeah, I think I heard some bit of a speech once about like
And
hope.
healthy cynicism. You
Yeah,
have
but
to be
also like,
cynical when there's so much fucking bullshit out there,
yeah,
especially when people are, yeah, anyway,
and like
especially in the
this concept of hope.
conspirituality cancer world.
Yeah, so
Sorry,
there's
go
this
ahead.
idea of like hope versus optimism. So optimism can sometimes be negative when you think things are gonna get better by themselves, whereas
Yes,
hope is more like it's worth staying in the fight, right? So hope
sure.
is like I'm in a terrible situation, but there is still hope. I could do this
Right.
and
I'm
this.
going to keep trying to find the
Yeah,
crest of the wave to keep
yeah,
going on. Yeah.
exactly. So that's how the NPO came about. And one of the things was right from the beginning, I wanted to only do things that are repeatable and scalable. So,
Science.
you know, what can I
Yeah.
do that really scales? So one of the big projects we're working on is to do health seminars at university for female university students about, you know, your self checks and you know, visiting the gyno and you know, getting your smear tests and HPV vaccine and stuff. Well, how can we do that as like a scalable thing? Like there's 5 of us. Of course, we can recruit some more volunteers or whatever, but the model I've come up with, which we're going to be putting into practice soon, is that we'll do the first few workshops ourselves, document everything, make it into a training package that then the students can run themselves. So it can then be at every university in Japan. So we then contact people who are already in a student leadership role. So maybe they are sports team captain or running some cultural club or whatever at the university. And we say, if you're interested in running a health seminar, we can send you this box of stuff, and you get access to these online videos that tells you how to do it. You get the template letter that you send to your local hospital saying, please send us a nurse and a gynecologist or whatever, or an oncologist. So, so it's all in a package. Here's how you run an event. Here's who you talk to at university to book a room. Here's how you make a poster online with Canva or whatever. So then it will be like a seminar kit. So then, even though there's 5 of us, we should better have thousands of seminars all over Japan. Well, what else can we do? If we want to do conferences where we get doctors, patients, and researchers together, well, that's fine, but after a while we would burn out. How do we make it a repeatable thing, a systematic thing? I love stupid acronyms, so I always think of like system as saves you stress, time, energy, and money. So can
Love
we
it.
make it like systematic so that other people could do it for us? Or, if we're doing a conference, how do we make the benefit go further than the conference? So how do we make it so that a conference automatically produces a video library and a bunch of books and a bunch of leaflets for patients about eating when you're sick from chemo or whatever? So for everything, like, how can we scale it? How can we repeat it? So that's kind of like the philosophy of the NPO. It's like,
Amazing.
small group of us, what can we do that is really scalable, and that ultimately the goal of the NPO is reduce yearly deaths from cancer. That's like the primary goal. Secondary goal to some extent is improve quality of life for cancer patients. So it's that simple. It's like, are we doing something that would somehow save lives? So we found out, for example, 30% of cancer deaths are caused by cancer wasting. So this thing it's called cachexia. It's spelled CACHEXIA. It's a stupid word. So this is like cancer wasting. So some of that could be the cancer stealing energy from the body. A lot of it will be like the chemo is just making you too sick to eat. So you've got treatment-induced anorexia, which I suffered from recently. I lost 7 kilograms in 6 weeks, I think, because I was like on chemo plus 3 other drugs, all of which had appetite suppression as one of their side effects. But we found out this isn't being tackled. So 30% of cancer deaths come from that. 50% of all cancer patients have some kind of unexplained weight loss during their time as cancer patients. And it's not tackled because it's a complex, difficult thing. It's hard to diagnose. It's currently only 1 drug available. And that I had that a couple of weeks ago, and the side effects are not nice. So that's something where it's like, well, what would be a serious effort to deal with that would be make a protocol to recognize it early on, which is difficult because you might have a cancer patient who's losing weight just because they're not eating, but cancer cachexia is really like you're eating but still losing weight. So it's like metabolic changes happening or whatever. So it's kind of hard to recognize, or the patient's eating but then they're vomiting. So so a protocol to recognize it early, a set of nutritional guidelines, and also physical therapy guidelines, because it seems that increasing the muscle is very important, right? Because our bodies, when we don't have calories, we would hope to lose the fat, but no, we lose the muscle. Muscle is
interesting,
right? Muscle is expensive, right? So muscle takes more calories to maintain than fat. Your fat is like your dire emergency kind of food for your body. So your body will lose fat in preference to muscle. And this seems to have impact on the immune system. So you get immune suppression, which means the cancer can grow quickly.
So interesting. Even just this is such a gem. It's so succinctly and easily digestibly, pardon the pun, described here, this kind of difference between muscle and fat. But also in the last Q&A you did, you talked about just something very simple that hadn't occurred to me, was those gel packs
Yeah.
of you know, like salary men have them because they can't eat enough to work their 55 million hour days. But actually they're really useful for people with cancer because they're kind of tasty, really easy to slip down, and are full of nutrition. So like I'm learning so much from this. So this, and I want people to learn even more, but I also want people to know how they can support your MPO, Matthew. So obviously go and look at his YouTube. We'll link to that in the show notes.
Okay.
But also I just really want to know like how that this is. I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about all this amazing detail you're offering for people. But I also want to find out how people can get curious about you, and also in consensus reality, how can they actually support what you're doing?
Yeah. So the first port of call is the website. So there's the website, which is just makecancerhistory.jp.
Okay.
The makecancerhistory.jp.
.jp. Make
Cancer,
all one word.
Yep. History. Makecancerhistory.jp. And of course, anyone can email me, matthew@makecancerhistory.jp. So on that website, there's embedded videos, there's links to the YouTube channel. So I've actually got my personal YouTube channel, which you'll find by looking for Matthew Dons or Cara Moon. That's got the like couple of hundred videos of like documenting my adventures in cancer. And then there's the Make Cancer History YouTube channel. That's got 2 sets of videos. So one is the cancer course videos, and they're about like 30 minutes each, and they go into a topic in reasonable depth, and it's just the stuff I wish I had known. But then there's also currently 50 short videos, soonish to be 100, that's just a single question, just answers a single question. What is a CT scan? What are the side effects of chemotherapy? Why does chemo cause skin rashes? Why does chemo cause an upset stomach? What's the difference between a CT scan and an MRI scan? They're just, really basic questions that I had no idea about.
I love your tagline. It says, "We can and must cure cancer now." What a
that's actually stolen from. There was an incredible book in the 1970s called Computer Lib. You can and must understand computers now. So this is the time when computers were like locked in a basement, and there were basically guys with lab coats, and you had to give them some punch
and
cards.
glasses like this.
And you'd come back the next day and they'd say your program failed on the first line, no results for you. So there was this like revolutionary computer book called by Ted Nelson called Computer Lib. You can and must understand computers now. So I stole his tagline.
Love it. I love that it's related back to your other love, like your super geek past.
Well, because I looked a lot at like going back to hugging. Hugging is a big thing in the tech world. It is so we have this saying, hacking is not a hobby, it's a survival trait. And like hugging is kind of this thing, right? That, it's, I mean, people joke about it's a silly cliche, but like, tech people wear bad t-shirts and hug each other. And that's really
really? I would have had the opposite. You wear bad t-shirts but don't like to be touched. But hey, what do I know? Here's me learning more.
Go to a hacker conference, everyone's like hugging each other, startups like hugging each other and congratulations. But and I guess like like if you're in a startup environment, you know, where it's like you get to choose any 90 hours a week to work, and you you're in like a high pressure thing with deadlines and no money, and you know, self-funded startup or whatever.
Sounds great.
Yeah, exactly.
High pressure,
So
no money. Yes, please.
so if people want to get involved, I mean, there's so I have my personal GoFundMe page, which
Yeah, that your personal GoFundMe page, which is what, Matthew?
matthewdons.org. That
Yep.
just takes you to the GoFundMe page.
Hmm.
Donations are always so donations are massively appreciated, because they are currently paying for my treatment, but also, you know, it allows me to spend more time on the unpaid NPO stuff. And then we're just in the process of setting up the subscription thing for the NPO, where people will be able to, you know, make a small recurring monthly donation, or of course, so that will, I don't know when this is going to go out, but that's just going to be makecancertree.jp/donate. But basically, yeah, the website is where everything is. We do have a ghastly Facebook page like everyone has. But yeah, the website is the key thing, and that links to all the YouTube videos and the YouTube channels anyway. And people are always welcome to contact me. I cannot and do not give medical advice. I am often slow to reply, but you know, anyone messages me, I'm going to make an effort to help them out. So yeah.
That's fantastic. Love it. Um, Matthew, you've triggered me quite hard with all this computer talk and talk of computers at school, because I was one of these kids who was classically like top of the class until I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, like 14 or 15, and then I went off the rails.
Okay.
um so you know, top five in pretty much everything, even the topics I wasn't that good at,
Yeah.
until computers, when I got 45% and probably a royal bollocking from my parents, and came like last or something. I found my school reports. It was shocking. But that was also in the days when the sports teacher was also the computer
Yeah.
teacher, you know.
Yeah. And we still
I actually had, yeah,
we still have
I
no
had,
idea how we teach computing. Like people still don't really know what it is. How do we teach it? How, you know, that I'm very involved in teaching computing to kids, and a big thing is, you know, I want them to create, not consume. I mean, consume is fine, but at least create as well. And yet,
yeah,
so much computing stuff is designed as a one-way thing. Like, if you remember when in the late 90s, your web browser could also make web pages. It had an HTML editor in, right? There's early versions, Netscape Navigator or whatever. And everything has become so one way. Like with an iPad is very good for consuming. It's actually quite bad for creating. You can
yeah.
create, but the software doesn't work very well. You never really know where your fucking files are. It's like, you know, tablets are not very good.
You like that?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like, you know, creating and consuming should it should be it should not feel any different, right? It should be just as you know, watching a video should just be as easy as creating one. And it's still not, as you and I know, all the stuff you have to deal with. So
Oh no, it's, yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah. So I've absolutely loved talking to you today. It's a bittersweet conversation, but it's just part of the many ways to lead a life. I see your life as full and as valid and um as rich as mine, even with the situation that you're in. And I am so delighted that you were able to carve out a little bit of time, and that you were well enough to talk to me and to be able to kind of highlight to the listeners how they can help you, but also to listen to all your wisdom and knowledge. I love this kind of curiosity that you had when you were young, and that reading was such a big thing for you. I think that, you know, that was another thing I wanted to say about myself. If I find some of the stuff that you say relatable, is I'm not a fast reader. So I'm
yeah,
clever. I have a degree in science, biology, and psychology. I was a failed medical student, so I really had my sights set on, you know, going to medical school. But I'm a slow reader. So when you're talking to me about 100-page, I am so thrilled that there's something to watch and listen to instead
Yeah.
of a 100-page
But
brochure. It really
isn't it,
works for
isn't it,
somebody like me too,
yeah. But
you
isn't it
know?
so fascinating that when we learn to read at school, after you learn to read, there's no more teaching about how to read?
Interesting.
Isn't that a bit weird? Like
Interesting.
you're not taught reading strategies, you're not taught
That's interesting.
literature,
Now
you're not
that's another rabbit hole we could go
you're not
down, Mr.
taught how to
Dons.
choose books. You know, but isn't that a bit
Yeah,
odd? You know, it's a bit like
absolutely.
it's a bit like driving. Typically, when people pass their driving test, they then don't have any more driving lessons. That seems a bit weird. Like, wouldn't you want some ongoing training? Would you, you know, I've done advanced driving lessons, and it's like, wow, there's this whole other way of driving. We learn to drive without using brakes.
Yep.
Like, oh,
So I think that what you do is so important. I really loved kind of constructing that image of you from like your childhood and all the things that go to create a person, all those kind of pieces. Like I will never get that. I'll probably dream about this tonight, you crawling through the Roman remains and then taking that into the classroom
nowadays.
and just having this thirst and curiosity that has driven you forward. And the other thing that is quite interesting, you were talking about HIV. I worked a year in the sexual health services in Birmingham. Actually, it was on campus where you went to university, the South Birmingham Health Authority Sexual Health Services, and I worked in the HIV department for my gap year. So I did 2 years and then a gap year, and I was writing reports, and that's where I got my disdain for new age therapies and stuff,
Yeah,
because at that time there was no cure for HIV, and people were turning to drinking their own piss and things like that because they were just
yeah,
desperate. You talk about desperation, and you've gone in the kind of scalable and repeatable area, right? You've gone in
yeah.
the science area. Some people were so desperate they went in that area. But when you're talking about riding the crest of the wave, at that time, AZT had just
Mm,
finished its clinical trials.
yeah,
Highly toxic, very controversial, but it meant, as you said, some people at the top of the pyramid just got the
yeah,
fortune, just got the lottery where they survived long enough to get to the next, to the next, to the
yeah.
next. And now we have PrEP.
Mm,
So there's just that it's so interesting to look at that through the lens of my own personal history with that as well. And just your incredible generosity, but I also like your honesty in that the marketing side of your brain is like, yes, these videos are they're generous and they're giving, but they're also to drive people towards my GoFundMe page, the GoFundMe page being uh we'll link to it in the links here. I've got it open in front of me here. And also this terrific Make Cancer History page that you've started, in the MPO Make Cancer History that you have started as well, and how that can help, especially in your case, women with HPV related cervical cancer, which is one of your interest areas, and also breast cancer. But perhaps this can also stimulate a few women out there to go into medicine and create this kind of
yeah.
new area. But of course, it all helps everything. So Matthew, I want to just say thank you so much for today. My usual question is, there are many ways to lead a life. What does that mean to you?
Oh,
In one sentence? So I'm aware that you probably need to go and get your lunch or get your
well,
kids' lunch together.
so in one word is like defiance, kind of defiance of the norm. I think is really important because you know social norms are there to keep people down, and I
Yes.
don't think necessarily kind of big conspiracy kind of thing, but just you know troublemakers make trouble, and the social norms keep them in a place. So yeah,
Yeah,
just
culture. Yeah.
questioning things and defying the norm, because I mean with cancer the norm is it's not a happy ending, right? When you have terminal cancer the story ends with your death. um, and for some of us quite soon. So it doesn't make sense to follow that path. Yeah. It's a bit of a messy answer,
Wonderful.
but yeah.
No, it's not. Defiance. Defiance. I mean, I said dogged determination, but now defiance is in play as well. I honestly could talk to you all afternoon.
Quick,
I
let's do
don't
it
feel
again.
like I've
Let's do it again. Quick.
even I want to do it again. I love it. I've just had you're so generous in your answers, Matthew. And I want to say thank you to everybody today. Where is the one place you want people to go to?
Yep.
Makecancerhistory.jp.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Definitely.
Make cancer history, all one word, .jp. I'm on there now. It is a full website, very clear, very easy to navigate. Go over there and find out what you can do and how you can defy the culture and how you can defy the social norms to, you know, to create and to invent from, there's that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think Matthew typifies that, but it's all part of this continuum for him and for us. Matthew, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for listening. It's been an absolute joy. And we'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.